what's new about today is that the extension of that principle goes to the vast amount of foodstuffs and plant products that we bring in from the European Union. So the checks have always been done really at, a border control post, infrastructure at our ports. But the issue with, as we say, Dover and Eurotunnel, the sheer quantity of food that's coming through every day to feed the nation means that special infrastructures had to be constructed near that port.
Right.
And that's going to be paid for. We accept it.
So
the issue is how government is making small business disproportionately pay the burden for these costs and infrastructure.
New Brexit border checks are introduced today, nearly 8 years after the UK voted to leave the EU, and disruption is widely expected. Physical product inspections on flowers, meat and dairy products are likely to lead to increased costs for consumers, as well as those delays. We can talk more about this with the UK Business Head of Trade Policy at British Chambers of Commerce. That's William Bain. Very good afternoon, William.
Good afternoon.
Can we really try and imagine all of this? So can you tell us what happens to a truck tomorrow that wouldn't have been happening, say, this time last year?
So all trucks arriving from the European Union into Great Britain will have to go through something called a border control post. Now, the government is funding and running one at Ashford-Sevington, which covers Dover and Eurotunnel, which are by far the two biggest arteries, if you like, for foodstuffs coming into Great Britain from the EU. So most of the food will come through there. At other ports, there will be, which are privately run, there will be private charges plus port health charges that are levied for example, products coming into Immingham. So the key thing is pass through those border control posts. And the other element about today is that businesses will be charged for consignments that pass through those border control posts, and charged per consignment up to a capped level of £145 per consignment. And when you add that into the extra veterinary charges that came in at the end of January, you're talking about £330 in extra consignment import charges, which small and medium-sized companies have to meet, that they didn't have to meet before Christmas.
So this is the common user charge. So who's getting that money? That's going to the UK border control to man all of this? It's going straight to the Treasury? Who does that cost go to?
It will go to Treasury, and it is meant to defray the cost of introducing this physical infrastructure. So these border control posts, these units that we'll see, in terms of Sevington, it's maybe about 10 miles or so north of Dover and Eurotunnel. So it's paying for the physical infrastructure, but also for the IT infrastructure, which is backing up a lot of this. And again, why we probably won't see disruption this week is because of the scale of the workarounds on some of the IT systems that are happening in order to make sure that there's a priority of flow of goods in the short term at least. So we're not expecting to see that much in the way of delays or disruption. But the key thing is that businesses have to get ready for the charges, because those invoices are going to drop in 12 weeks' time with bills of thousands of pounds.
Quite a few suppliers, though, have said that they are worried about their consignments simply because of how long it might take for these checks to go ahead. So a classic example has been if you are importing orchids and they've got to be kept in a truck at a very specific temperature. Actually, if you stop that truck and if there was a delay and you had to take everything off the truck in order to have this physical inspection, then actually the quality of the goods is put at risk. Is that a fair point to be making?
Absolutely right. And one of the things about the way that the checks will come in for plant products is that there is no way of forecasting whether your lorry is going to have the seals checked, be opened up completely. You'll be required to take out the trees or the saplings, and they undergo full inspections. And also for those horticultural charges, opening up the entire lorry, you could be facing a charge of £700. So at the moment, the way that the system of charging has been set up, it is potluck as to whether you're going to incur vast bills, and there's very little way that you can really legislate and plan against that
Yeah.
in terms of those horticultural goods.
Can I ask a very obvious question? And just forgive me if this is really displaying my own ignorance, but at what point in the supply chain would these checks, which are necessary, aren't they? I mean, particularly when you're talking about things that are, part of a biosecurity kind of danger, where would those checks usually or before this have taken place?
Well, we've been doing checks for goods from outside the European Union on a risk-based basis for decades. What's new about today is that the extension of that principle goes to the vast amount of foodstuffs and plant products that we bring in from the European Union. So the checks have always been done really at, a border control post, infrastructure at our ports. But the issue with, as we say, Dover and Eurotunnel, the sheer quantity of food that's coming through every day to feed the nation means that the special infrastructures had to be constructed near that port,
Right.
and that's going to be paid for. We
Uh,
accept it. The
so
issue is how government is making small business disproportionately pay the burden for these costs and infrastructure.
So when you talk to DEFRA about this, what is their response? And do they have a kind ear that's leaning in towards you or completely the opposite?
Well, we haven't really had meaningful response back from DEFRA in the last weeks as to any alternative than to bring in a flat rate charge that hammers small business. And that is what the common user charge is. The EU, when they introduced controls back in 2021, did so in relation to tonnage. So the more you imported, the more you contributed. What we've got is a flat tax that hammers companies, delicatessens, the local cafe, the corner shop, bringing in everyday products that British people eat and consume every day. And they are being disproportionately asked to pay the burden of all of this new infrastructure. And that's wrong. There should be ways that government can work with industry to mitigate the impact on SMEs and make sure that hard-pressed small companies don't face hardship through no fault of their own.
A gentleman called Marco Forgione, who's Director General of the Institute of Export and International Trade, says that the new system will eventually help the UK to have a world-leading border. What is a world-leading border? What does that mean to you? I mean, it sounds like a great thing to be aiming towards.
Well, I know Marco well, and what the BCC and the Institute of Exports share in common is that those aspects of the border, around things like customs, trade document digitalization, we want those to be digitalized as soon as possible, and we're totally with government in terms of part of the agenda. However, what we could do in relation to these checks is negotiate a suitable agreement with the European Union as a long-term solution and cut the costs of doing trade, cut some of this virtual documentation that businesses have to prepare, cut back on some of these checks. That's the long-term solution to this. In the short and medium term, we need government to work with us on mitigating the cost impact on SMEs, which is going to be severe. And we're going to see that when those first bills drop into the email inboxes in just 12 weeks' time.
I take it you're in the business of importing cheese from France and the continent. Have you felt the impact yet?
Absolutely. It's been a hell of a week so far. We've battled with the Brexit paperwork before, but this new one has given a whole new dimension to costs because it's all whittled down to whether it's pasteurized, unpasteurized, high risk, medium risk, low risk, and each item is on an invoice has to go on this new paperwork called a CHED, And if you have an invoice, for instance, we have an invoice from a producer producing cheeses that are both medium risk and low risk, and we can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
It's got to be separated, because if we just have it on this one invoice and we put it onto the new paperwork, the higher limit will be issued for the payment for each line. So if there's 50 lines and 30 of them are low risk, but 20 of them are medium risk, it will always go on to the high amount. So
Right.
we're looking at a huge amount of money that we're going to be spending over the next year.
Right, so you already have had a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare with the border
Oh gosh,
paperwork, and
yes.
or
There's nothing is easy.
no, I say paperwork, the electronic keyboard getting overheated. Now, what about the actual business at the border? Have you had any consignments through today? And what's happened to them? Are they sort of, pleasingly spreading the smell around some stopping point at a border?
Well, in fact, we didn't have. We usually have them on Wednesday or Thursday. So our next shipment coming in will be on Thursday,
Right.
and apparently we've got one or two papers that haven't been signed off properly because the producer left something out on the paperwork. So we're having to hold back. But basically everything is in order. It's just a question of now getting them to the border and doing the shipping across. But if the paperwork has one little thing missing, it can just be one silly little thing like the number of boxes.
Yeah.
They leave out one box, then that whole shipment has
Yeah.
to be held back.
Well, fingers crossed for you. I mean, what have you got coming in? Is it going to be, I don't know, some lovely French Roquefort? Are we talking about some
Oh, yeah.
Italian dolce
Well,
latte? Not that it makes a great difference, I suppose.
Yes, we're getting all the usual, but I'm having to rethink how much I bring in and what I bring in from now on. It's not going to be like, cherry picking as we used to do and just bringing in. It's going to be very, very strictly controlled what medium risk we bring in one week and what low risk we bring in another week. So we might not always have cheese like we used to all the time.
Oh, dear. So what's going to have to go?
Well, nothing necessarily has to go. It's just that you won't see it as often. And I'm rethinking seasonality of cheese and paring it down so that we can cut the costs of the paperwork. It's, every line of that paperwork costs money to be done. So, we've got to try and keep the prices down because otherwise it's going to be a nightmare.
Well, a lover of smelly continental cheese like me is feeling your pain.